Welcome, welcome. This is the first podcast of what will hopefully be multiple podcasts with Ardot. And my guest, don't laugh. I see him looking over the fucking thing at me. Fucking piece of
Hold it together.
piece of fucking shut up, Fowler. Ardot and Fowler. Whoop-de fucking knee. Uh, Welcome to our podcast, where we talk about literally anything that pops into our heads like the day before we start recording. Um, so do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Mr. Fowler? Tell the people who you are, who you be, what you're doing, what you've been up to.
Sure, I'm Fowler, and I'm interested in many subjects: propaganda, populism, mass media.
Are you done? Oh, you
I
sounded
am
like you
done.
were going to continue. I'm sorry. That ended in like a ended like a question mark. And I am Ardot. I am the wonderful host of this podcast. I'm the one currently recording everything, putting everything together, doing pretty much like 98% of the actual labor. While my guest here is just chilling in his house with his little derpy headphones, and microphone that he dug out of his closet from like 20 years ago. Uh, he gave me a thumbs up. Anyway, yeah, so we basically talk about all things politics, all things culture, all things to do with political, theory, academic theory, heavy topics,
History.
history, that as well. Those sorts of topics. And so today, for our introductory podcast, we thought it would be a good idea to talk about uh, branding, and particularly branding as it has to do with the Trump administration. I had, you know, I was at work. I think it was last week, and I was trying to think about something to write about or to do a video about, and I started to really think, as somebody who has dabbled in film and television a little bit, what makes a politician in their branding? And I think Trump did this very well. This is one of the things that I think Donald Trump was excellent at. Maybe even subconsciously, because I don't think the man's really excellent at a lot of things. But I think what really helped Trump when he was running for president was his brand. And I was interested in sort of researching the branding as it has to do with politicians. Because, as I told Fowler, we live in a digital age where your appearance and what you put out actually matters just as much or maybe even more than the words that you speak and the things that you say. Um, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Fowler.
I think depending on the technology and the time, um, you have more or less power to find your own individual brand. Like you look at like the 1890s and the early 20th century, where the party had so much more power than it ever has like since. And I think there's a lot of things like radio and television and the internet allowing politicians to speak outside of the press or outside of the machine apparatus. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing now of like people like Trump being able to just use, like Twitter, for example, as a means to talk to the people directly and to form a brand separate from the party itself.
Yeah, that's in forming your own brand outside of the party. I think is definitely one of the things that Trump did during his presidency and even before his presidency. Um, and I think what he represented, you know, and the people that he was representing. Now, I will say, when I said earlier that sometimes the appearance of the politician matters more than the words of the politician itself, I think that takes you far to an extent. Um, I mean, you and I both, Fowler, have talked about before in private about how the media, is the media exists now to a degree that, for the most part, if you're like an average Fox News viewer, you're not getting specific information. Um, and maybe even on the flip side, you have progressive media, all this. So I think it takes you far to an extent. I don't think it's the entire thing, or the entire picture, but it definitely, you know, in relation to Trump, I think part of his appeal was that he was able to hearken to this sort of idealized version of America, that, which is pretty much just wealth. Um, at the end of the day, the version of America, the sort of 1950s, 1940s, 50s golden era of America, which was just obscene wealth. I think his brand, you know, politically is a callback to that sort of nostalgic era, um, which is
I think
uniquely
in some
American.
ways, but I think one of the things that makes Trump really interesting is a lot of a lot of his spiritual sort of ancestors, I guess, like the Southern demagogues. A lot of them, when they build their personal brand, a lot of it is appearing as common as you can be, appearing as one of the people, appearing as someone who's like working class, someone who has kind of mainstream sensibilities. And I think Trump is interesting because
He did the
um,
opposite.
he, yeah, he presents himself as sort of this incredibly wealthy elite, essentially. Um, and I'm kind of interested in what you think about why he did, like, I guess the reason he did it was narcissism, but why it worked.
As somebody who's studied media and Brandon, in college, I think context matters. The time period in which we're living matters a lot, and I think we're living in an era where, I mean, and it's like wondering, why are the Kardashians as big as they are? Why is it that we are, drawn to people like the Kardashians, people like, the rappers, the flexers, the hustlers, the people that go, the DJ Khaled's that go on and flex their gold chains and flex their Lamborghinis and Bugattis, the Jake Pauls, the YouTubers with millions of dollars that rent out houses in LA, and just make YouTube videos flexing their wealth. I think in a weird way, you know, he he was able to capitalize on that. And I think, for the people that supported him, he represented a sort of counter elite, the conservative counter elite. You have the progressive counter elites. Um, and I think, I don't know historically how effective, on the conservative side, coming across as the common man, how often that's worked for conservatives. But I definitely think that the context of the times benefited Trump immensely. We're living in an era of just mass consumption and of hustle culture and of capitalist hustle culture, where we are looking at, you know, these incredibly wealthy people, and we are, we are lauding their success as a product of American exceptionalism. So I think it's a contextual thing, and I think he
I
struck out
wonder
at the
though,
right time.
I wonder though about like because Trump does really well with boomers and older people. I
Hmm.
think that's his main demographic, and
Definitely.
that hustle culture you're talking about. I think it's a younger generation thing, and he doesn't do terrible of young people, but like that's not. I don't think really where the red meat is in his base.
Yeah. Well, I
But
heard. I
yeah, it's
remember
it's
a.
an interesting point.
I remember a quote that somebody said that every, like, I don't remember who said this. I wish I could. If anybody, I don't know if we're gonna put comments on in this, but it was basically that the reason why Americans keep getting fucked by corporatism is that the average American thinks that he's a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. You
Hmm.
know, the idea that, like, you can be 60 years old and you know you're just a you're gonna be a millionaire, right? You're gonna work hard, you're gonna pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do what you got to do. But as we know, that doesn't work out like 98% of the time, or like really 99% of the time.
Mm.
That's why we have the 1%, uh, and not the fucking 40% or the 50%. But
Yeah, in a sense, what you're talking about, like that American dream idea of everyone being a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, I think I think it's an interesting thing to drive people in the world we're living in, where so many people are cynical about the American dream, both on the left and the right, and so many people are cynical about globalization. So Trump is he's an odd figure because there's a nostalgia to him that I think is really unique
yeah,
among like political figures.
yeah. I read an article the other day, and it was talking about Melania Trump and her wardrobe and the way in which she and her family members styled themselves. It's you look at the way that members of the Trump circle. And that's another thing I think too is that you have this Trump political dynasty. The idea of a political dynasty. That kind of I think the Kennedys definitely had one. Um,
The
Huey
Clintons.
Clinton's had one. The Bushes had one. The Obamas didn't really have that, and that's not really a bad thing. But um, the idea of political dynasties has always kind of been part of that nostalgic American image. But it was an article about how Melania Trump and you know Ivanka styled themselves and about the fashion decisions they made and how they kind of were able to use fashion to you know portray that nostalgic America. Um, and how Melania and her stylists were very deliberate in the way that they used her outfits. Um, you know, uh, it was really interesting, and I definitely think that's somebody. And I mean, Melania Trump was a model, so when you're a model, I mean, that's what you learn all of that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of branding. And I definitely think Trump's use of social media also contributed, but I think it's not everything, but context matters, and that's my assessment of his brand. It's obscene wealth. It's obscene wealth. Um, there was an interest. I don't know if you ever read um or you ever heard of like if you ever read about some of the early critiques of America. Have you ever studied that, like back in the day, like what Europeans and other people were saying about America?
Like Tocqueville and all that shit.
Well, not even
Like
Tocqueville.
Tocqueville.
Yeah, yeah, Tocqueville, and then in like the eight like early 1800s, mid 1800s. Um, it was the descriptions of like American culture back then. Like it's fascinating because they talk about how Americans only give a shit about wealth. That obscene displays of wealth and obscene displays of you know money and are like central to like the American sort of culture. So it doesn't surprise me, but I think there are other reasons why he won besides his branding.
Yeah, but Trump is I think one of the interesting things about a cult of personality, and he's definitely when we're talking about branding with a Trump, we're definitely talking about a cult of personality type,
Absolutely.
is um the advantage of a cult of personality is you centralize all the power around yourself, but the disadvantage is that it um I think it's really hard to build an institution around yourself because your personal brand is more powerful than your ideology. And I think that's why the Republican Party is having such a problem now is they more than a coherent ideology, they sort of inherited Trumpism. And Trumpism can't really exist without Trump. And the question is sort of how will the party overcome that? And I don't know if they will ultimately.
Yeah, that's also it'll be interesting to see with his indictment, how all of that transpires. But it
Yeah, I'm
it
not holding
was
my breath. The next arrangement is, I think, like in 8 months.
yeah,
So they're
it's
gonna
it's
drag this shit
December.
out.
It's like December 13th or something. Um,
Hmm.
and then 2023. Yeah, the election will be that next November, right? Yeah, I'm thinking of that correctly. Because
I
our
think so.
fucking campaign season is like 2 years long. It's ridiculous. So I always get confused. I'm like, wait. But then December, and then um, he won't be charged probably till literally during the campaign. Or not charged, but he won't his actual sentence won't be given if he's found guilty. He'll be on trial while he's campaigning.
Yeah, there's a chance that he will be irrelevant by the time things roll in. It might be an Alex Jones situation with Sandy Hook, where like he's not really at prominence at the point where they really go after him.
Yeah, but the thing that back to your statement about how will the GOP survive Trumpism, because that's what I think ultimately this is. His brand is a brand of Trumpism. It's its own sort of package, and it can't really survive without him. The question is what's going to replace that brand. Um, and I don't know if there's a Republican with a strong enough personality, to be able to sort of take on that mantle or to create sort of a counter, a counter movement. DeSantis is an authoritarian, I think, but he's like a wet noodle. His fucking the least charismatic man. you know.
I
Um,
I think there's two types of branding that are like important in this kind of discussion. One is the personal branding of the candidate themselves, and the second is the media and the way they package candidates for the audience. And I think what DeSantis will really prove, in a sense, is how powerful the media is in comparison to how powerful the personal branding is. If DeSantis wipes the floor of Trump and becomes the primary candidate, then I think that probably shows like the media is what created Trump and made him as powerful as he is. If DeSantis is steamrolled by Trump, then it kind of shows like the conservative media is finished. They don't control the narrative anymore, and they can't really astroturf candidates that are powerful enough to fight off the Trumps, basically.
yeah, yeah. It's almost like a which came first, the chicken or the egg, like that sort of scenario.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess a question to you, in reverse. I feel like I'm interviewing you, but we're literally co-hosts. Uh, I guess a question to you, like, what do you think? And this is a broad ass question, so feel free to just choose to pick it apart and choose what you want to answer. But what about it? What about the Trump brand do you think appealed to people?
I think I think a lot of the roughness and the crudeness is something that we see historically as like a thing that separates the elite from the people. Like Trump, even if he is a billionaire, he presents himself in a very working class stereotype kind of way. He's very crass, he's very open, he's very opinionated, and I think a lot of people see themselves in it. And then um, I think he framed himself as powerful and wealthy, but not necessarily as an insider. He framed himself as an outsider, as more of like the entertainer looking in at the establishment rather than the establishment itself. And I think a lot of that appeals to people when people are angry at the establishment. They pick the people that they think are powerful enough to fight for their behalf but aren't part of the club. And I think for a lot of people Trump was a loud boisterous brick, and they wanted to throw it into the window of the Republican Party as hard as they could. And that's what they tried to do with him. What about you? What do you think?
I would pretty much agree with everything you said. That, and I'm looking at my notes right here because I actually started writing an outline for the potential video that I wanted to do. So let me see if I can find my notes. Yeah, this is what's bad about putting all your fucking shit in a Google document is you can't find it when you need it. Um, don't laugh at me. I know you're too scared to use Google documents. I would pretty much agree with everything that you said about him being a brick and people wanting to throw that brick into the at the Republican Party. Um,
I think there's a problem with that sort of mindset in a sense because, like, the idea of, like, you have a theoretical brick and you can throw it through the establishment's window and fix things. Um, if all it took was good, loud men to enter the establishment to make it better, well, we wouldn't have the problems we have. The problem is that the politics is corrupting and it's corroding and it causes people to basically just get crushed by those institutions to the point that they're not able to help the people in any meaningful way. And I guess that's the risk of a populist sort of cult of personality figure, is what is the real likelihood if they gain power that they'll really be able to fix things. And I think there are examples of that working, but they're definitely the anomaly.
Well, and I think as well, a brick and a human are two different things. You can pick up a brick, but what if that brick has a grenade in it? Like like you're like, oh shit, a brick, and then the brick literally has like a fucking like a like the big boy like in the it's like you can you never really know with anybody whose faith you put in, any politician whose vote you give, who that person really is, and I think that was what was so scary about Trump. It's like Trump told you who he was. He was very bold about telling you what type of person he was. And I really think one of the reasons why so many people why he was so why he was so polarizing was that he could have done everything that he did, but and there have been presidents who have done vile shit in the past, and I think you and I have talked about it. The difference between someone like Nixon is that Nixon, there was an air of respectability to Nixon. There was an air of respectability to George Bush, and to all the presidents before, which is why people weren't disowning their family members over voting for Nixon. Whereas with Trump, he told you who he was at the beginning, and so if you're a voter, you were kind of slapped in the face with the reality of like, oh, yeah, this is an openly racist, democratically hostile president, and people are willing to vote for that, openly, and support that openly. And that kind of forced people, I think, to think, it forced, people on both sides of the political spectrum to have to actually face open demagoguery, in a way that they just really didn't have to with other presidents.
And I think a lot of this comes down to this idea of the brick. Like, in peaceful times, likability is probably more important because, you're not expecting them to do anything too drastic. You just want them to keep the US economy and government functioning. And you're picking someone that seems reasonable to you. But if you're afraid, if you're angry, if you think the world is collapsing, I think civility is a lot less appealing, and it matters less and less to you in a sense, the likability or morality of the candidate, and more about their power and more about whether they're on your side. And yeah, I just think it's there's a level of desperation that hasn't really been a part of American politics in a widespread sense in a very long time. But I'm sure if you go back to the 1930s with like people like Huey Long or
FDR,
the 1960s, yeah, I'm sure you find people who are a little rougher and tougher and less inclined to that stuff.
Yeah. I've managed to pull up my notes, and I just wanted to say, because I opened the podcast by talking about branding, and so I just wanted to clarify, I guess, to people listening. 24 minutes into the podcast, really great of me. What the fuck I was talking about when I said branding. But I guess I summarize, the American brand as like this sort of gaudy, and this is completely subjective, by the way, or this is non-judgmental. I'm not saying this as an attack on America or American culture. I mean, America is the richest country in the world and the most prosperous country in the world. It makes sense as to why we would, we would center our sort of brand around displays of wealth because we have so much of it here. Um, but I've pretty much summarized the American brand as being, gaudy wealth, vanity, rigid gender conformity. Um, and this also is to me the Trump brand as well. Um, and I think the change in material conditions have sort of revitalized this nostalgia towards the old America. Um, and then I make the argument that national branding, is very unique to the digital age. Because our casual interactions with culture and politics have become increasingly visual, where some politicians will increasingly brand themselves as distinct cultural representations of the areas that they represent. And they can do this by using the aesthetics of nostalgia, patriotism, and national culture. The media acts as a conduit in this example. Um, and I think branding and nationalism are intertwined. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when I say the American
Yeah, it
brand,
makes
that's kind of what
sense.
I mean.
I think branding doesn't have to necessarily be nationalist like all the time.
Yeah,
Like obviously like the Soviet Union branded themselves, communist China branded themselves, but I think
I
every
think
generation
nationalism
of
plays a
America
role.
brands themselves. Yeah, it can definitely have a binding effect. But I think there's as many brands of America as there are generations of Americans.
True.
And a lot of Trump's Americanism challenges like the post World War II America. It challenges the diversity of America. It challenges like the respectability of America in some ways. It's it's an older, more primordial version of America, a very white America,
Yeah.
a very unapologetic America.
Yeah. No, that I definitely agree with that. I think he appealed to, and I mean it makes sense, as to why boomers voted for him. Um, because that's their generation. That's the America that they grew up under. A lot of the people that voted for him were around or are children of the people that grew up in that time. So, you know, whether or not Trump was conscious of that, I have no idea. I don't know if the man is conscious of anything at any point, at any time, other than the chicken nugget stains on the walls of the White House. Uh,
Yeah, I don't believe Bannon or Miller are part of his 2020 or his 2024 like campaign run. So I'm curious how his campaign will be different given that a lot of the people who are suspected to be the architects of the Trump campaign, how it will change with them gone.
yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what angle he you know I don't know. It's almost too early to tell. I mean, he very well might not be relevant by the time 2024 rolls around. Um, I feel like, over the, because I mean, I don't remember a lot about the 2008 election. I mean, I was 9 years old. Um, doxing my age here, but I don't remember a lot about the run up to the 2008 election. So I don't really know, that campaign period, prior to, McCain and Obama. I don't remember what exactly was happening at that time period. I know there was the recession and then so but I don't remember what the political climate was like, and I don't know specifically. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh my god. Oh, I think I was gonna say that I don't specifically know if it was clear at that time who was gonna be the nominee. Um,
Yeah, I don't really know either. I think Obama was considered a long shot because he hadn't been a senator for that long. Um, I think that one of the things that makes that campaign really interesting is um, a lot of the reason why John McCain picked Sarah Palin to be his running mate is he was a moderate old school Republican and he needed the Tea Party vote, I think. And she was sort of the beginning of this radical populist Republican movement that would later become Trump. And you can see a lot of the hallmarks of Trumpism in her and in like her contemporaries in the Tea Party. The hyper nationalism, the hostility to intellectualism, the loose relationship with the truth, and the habitual lying, and some of the early like attacks on the press.
Yeah.
So I think this Trump brand has been decades in the making. He's just sort of
The perfect
the
storm.
final form of it, maybe.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he was the man with all the gifts, you know. He had the wealth, he had the outsider, you know, he had the personality, he had the media experience, and then he had, you know, the media, you know, actively helping him. So it's unsurprising to me that he ended up winning. You know what's funny? I was watching yesterday. This was an old interview. It was a Bill Maher, and he was interviewing. I think it was like Luis Gutierrez, the Latino Democratic representative from fucking Illinois, and then it was Joy Reid,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was Ann Coulter, and you know Ann Coulter. I think this is when she wrote her book, you know, that she went on to promote and all that. But they were talking about the book, and this was, and I didn't. It's funny. I watched the video thinking that it was like fairly recent, you know, because, but then towards the end, I realized that it was actually in 2015, and it was during the primary, like the beginning of the Republican primary. I don't even think the first debate had happened yet when this was taped. And there's a moment in it, and looking back, it's actually horrifying. There's a moment in it where Bill Maher asks Ann Coulter, you know, he's like, you know, who is your pick for the Democrat or for the Republican, you know, the Republican, um, who do you think is going to win the Republican primary for president? And she says Donald Trump. And everybody laughs at her, including Joy Reid and Luis Gutierrez and all of those, you know, people. They're cackling at her, and she's looking at them, you know, with a smile on her face. And she says, "No, it's Donald Trump. He's going to be the Republican nominee for president." Uh, you know,
Mm.
and um, and she said because of immigration. You know, that was her reasoning. She was like, you know, his stance on immigration and his stance on, you know, and then Luis Gutierrez, who was, you know, the Latino, you know, Democratic representative, he's, you know, he says like the Republicans are going to lose the Hispanic vote if they keep talking, you know, and it's just interesting to go back and watch those videos because you're kind of looking at it like, what the fuck does she know that we don't? You know, like what did she, you know, like what the fuck did Ann Coulter know that we didn't know, and how do you accurately
The
predict,
radical
you know?
the radicals are definitely, they've been right like from like 20, like starting in the rise of the Tea Party in like 2008 2009 to now. I think the one time the more radical sort of predictions failed is the midterms, the 2022 midterms. But it'll be interesting to see at what point people lose the plot, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I'm wondering,
Because,
how do you figure out the plot to begin with?
well, that's the question. I mean, um, I think I think one of the dangers of being in um, different times or unusual times is the unusualness becomes the norm, and I think it can sway a lot of people and sort of delude them about what's happening. Because after like a post-Trump world or post-pandemic world, I mean, anyone can win. I feel like
Yeah, that's definitely my.
the material conditions that allow for that can't last forever. You know, for better or for worse.
Yeah, well, in the midterms, you know, I think we're an indicator, you know, that you know that I think it indicated that Trumpism is unique to Trump, you know, and the rhetoric of Trump and the strategy of Trump doesn't extend to other Republicans. You know, like Carrie Lake is a good example of this. You know, she tried to be the election denier. She tried to do the Trump election strategy, and for the most part, she got laughed at. Um, and I think that's
Mm.
partially because she tried to do the election denial after after Jan 6 and after all that had gone. You know what I mean? Like it's you're using a failed strategy after the strategy has failed. You know? Like
Yeah.
you're it would be like like if there had been another fascist demagogue, post World War II who had immediately tried to invade Poland again. It's like, well, buddy, like, um, somebody already tried that and it didn't go well for him. So I don't know what you're doing, um, or invading Russia in the winter or whatever. But um,
It'll really be tested. That it's really a test of the media, because the right wing media, they want to present Trump as a success, and they want to champion a lot of the things they've done as like the correct thing, because to do so would be to lose face and legitimacy. And so, the question really is, at what point does reality start mattering? At what point is it um, obvious to everyone that the emperor has no clothes, or the strategy didn't work, or the candidate failed? And I think, what we're going to really see with Fox News where that line is.
yeah. Well, speaking of Fox News, I think this is a good time to segue because we got some time left, and maybe we can touch upon this broader in the next episode, but segueing into the Dominion lawsuit, speaking of Fox News. Uh, Fowler, my friend, you are more educated on this topic than I am because you have been keeping up with this lawsuit religiously. I have not, through no fault of my own. I'm leaving that to you, and then I'm going to leech off of your information that you get because I'm lazy. So tell the viewers about this
Yes.
Dominion lawsuit.
So for those that don't know, Dominion, which makes voting machines, basically, they're suing Fox News for spreading misinformation about the election. And the Dominion lawsuit's happening. There are other lawsuits. I think the combined amount is $5 billion, more or less. But basically, the lawsuits have sort of proven that a lot of the top Fox hosts and producers and business people, they all were aware that the election was a lie while peddling it. And that I don't find is interesting, because we know that they lie and we know that they don't believe it. The thing that I think is really interesting is the who controls the narrative, because what a lot of those release texts show is that there were a lot of people like Tucker Carlson who hated Donald Trump, who were antagonistic to the election lies and some of the other things he was doing, but they felt like they didn't have a control over the narrative, and that they had to basically parrot those lies or they would lose their audience and their power. And I think that presents a really interesting question of, who is it who really controls the narrative? Is it the media? Is it politicians? Because if an institution is powerful and entrenched as Fox News feels helpless against the narrative, what position does that put everyone else?
Yeah. Who controls the narrative is most definitely always the question, and I think that you know what's happened with Dominion, what happened with Jan 6 and the election lies is that you know, and I think it was you that said this, Fowler, that the GOP lost control of their voters, and Fox News lost control of their viewers, um, and so we are about to hit 40 minutes, so I definitely think we need to save the Dominion lawsuit for the next podcast, where we will talk in depth, and I will come back more educated and knowledgeable about the topic, because as of right now, I only know what my friend Fowler has told me, which is that Dominion, and I think Smartmatic as well. I did read this the other day, that Smartmatic, which I believe is the software, not the voting machine company, the software, they are also suing Fox News for even more than Dominion is suing them for. So, potentially two massive lawsuits that the network is having to grapple with. So, we are hitting the time here, about to be 40 minutes, and so we are going to go ahead and end this introductory episode into unnamed. That's what I'm calling this podcast, because I don't know what it's called yet. I haven't come up with the title. I didn't think of that until like 5 seconds ago. So the Unnamed Podcast with Fowler and Ardot. Two PhD political science majors from MIT and Harvard Law. Yeah, I have a master's in political science.
Bullshit.
Okay, see, why would you say that? like I'm trying to flex for the viewers, all right? This is why you need media training, my friend, all right? We're talking about narratives. Listen, nobody can see our faces. We can say whatever the fuck we want. All right?
Yeah, that's what Fox thought for a really long time.
Yeah,
it might now cost them $5 billion. And even if I went to MIT or Harvard or whatever, I don't know if I have 5 billion scratch lying around, you know?
Yeah, but money's made up anyway, you know? It's just like taxes. Oh, we just made it all up because we're bored in our fucking houses.
Is this your way of telling me that you didn't file your taxes?
I file my taxes legally. All right, IRS, if you're listening, I file my taxes legally. Y'all don't need to investigate anything, okay? Nothing. But anyway, podcast is ended, okay? I gotta make sure this actually recorded. Thank you guys so much for listening. Might be links to social media down below. I don't know. I don't know what's happening. If not, then it's just gonna be a blank, a blank, episode. But we'll talk about the Dominion lawsuit next time. And we'll go more in depth about that and the potential repercussions that lawsuit could have for media as a whole. Very interesting stuff. But I appreciate y'all for listening. I am Ardot, and my host is
Fowler.
Okay, it's a little bit of a delay there. You got to work on your outro, my friend. But thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see y'all in the next one.